Or we are live, right? I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for November 19th, 2024. We have an agenda before us. Do we have any additions or changes? Go ahead, Reeve.
So if there are no changes, I make the motion to approve the agenda as presented.
All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. So we have the meeting minutes of October 15th that were distributed to us earlier. Looking for feedback on those. Any changes or? Councillor Cunningham.
I'll move the approval of the October 15th, 2024 COW meeting minutes.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor? Carried. So we're going to just switch up our new business order a slight bit, and we're going to start off with 2.2. We'll have our road use. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Zier.
Thank you. All right, good morning, committee members. What I'm bringing for you today is a bit of a discussion piece. There's been some questions throughout committee and throughout council as far as our existing road use agreement procedures and policies, and I just wanted to identify it with a little bit of an overview for the committee here to look at, and then to answer any questions or any direction going forward. So basically, the road use agreements are a very common practice by a lot of municipalities in the province. They really regulate the heavy truck traffic throughout the province, throughout municipalities. It gives us a bit of a tool to direct the routing that we want on certain heavy hauls, as well as limiting the amount of vehicles, the time they're hauling, that sort of thing. So we have this tool that we utilize primarily for oil and gas activities. We also do see some larger developments. We do implement that on some of those as well. And we have a little bit of a different process for that because we do see those more limited than we do the oil and gas. So just going at the overview here. So initially, if we go on the oil and gas energy industry direction, we normally get a request through our contractor, which is Road Data. They make a request to that contractor. They forward us the details on it. Our inspector goes out, verifies that the road is adequate for the routing that they're proposing, puts any conditions that he feels warrant on that road, if it's dust control, if it's limiting the hours of operation, all those sorts of things. We put those as a condition on that oil and gas energy industry applicant. From there, we do a pre-inspection of the road, to actually video it, each one, just to make sure that we know the existing condition, that there's no questioning after the fact. The haul occurs, and we have a final inspection done by our contractor, after which the road is basically taken off the road use agreement, and we've given it back authority on that. Like I say, during that time, we also sometimes request that a contract grader be put on that road, responsibility of the applicant, just to make sure that it isn't our own resources doing that extra work on those heavy hauls. So that's been the route for a number of years. I'd say 20 plus years here we've been operating in that effect with oil and gas quite well. A lot of our operators are long-standing and have a good relationship with our staff here and understand what our requests are. Very little knowing that they're coming back to likely another application in the coming months. They're very responsive to our requests for rate maintenance and that sort of thing. The other side here that we've just started implementing the last number of years is a developer-driven road use agreement. So it's a little bit different. It isn't handled through road data or a contractor, basically because we have fewer of those come up. We wanted to have a little bit more internal hold of these. So we have a separate road use agreement. They're both actually included in your package here if you had any questions on them, just for interest level. But basically the only difference with this one is, like I say, it's more handled internally with our own staff. We do have the same requirements for them, the number of vehicles, routing, making sure that the roads that they're proposing can handle it. What we do on these situations is sometimes ask for a bond. I wouldn't say it's entirely, it is more of a case by case, depending on the applicant and if there is a long-standing relationship with the county, if there has been past road use agreements with us, that sort of thing. But typically we ask for $5,000 per mile in an irrevocable letter of credit. And that's kind of a security that we hold within the county. And basically it's a set of, it's a security that's in place, a deposit that if for some reason this company doesn't adhere to any of our requirements, we have that ability to go in and utilize that money, draw it from the bank, and actually use our own resources or hire a contractor, whatever it ends up being, to perform that work on that road, not drawing down any of our own resources. So it's something that we're trying and is, again, a pretty common practice in other municipalities for this sort of thing, to take those kind of bonds. So they're not bonds, they're actually letters of credit, securities with the bank that are fairly straightforward to pull the resources. So those are the two road use agreements that we have in place here. Like I say, this is kind of a high-level review of them and really based on some of the questions that we've had. Some of the questions that came up in the past here are road use, road bans. So these road use agreements don't necessarily eliminate the or absolve the contractor from having to follow road bans. On a very limited basis, we may look at bumping up. If it's a 75% road ban, we may allow them to do 90% and then monitor that road to see if there is any detrimental effects to it. But still, we prefer to just route them away from the banned roads and keep them on the higher grade roads. Some other questions that came up were passenger vehicles. So these road use agreements really are directed towards heavy haul. Public roadways, it's very hard for us to control what type of traffic is on that outside of these. Because in the end, if the contractor isn't doing what we request them to do, our hammers on that are, like I say, going away from the relationship basis here and knowing that there may be some future need for that, we either ban the road or we close the road. Those are kind of our options going forward. And that's really hard to justify when it's a passenger vehicle sort of traffic draw on that. So that's where these are really directed towards the heavy traffic and that sort of thing. And then again, just to finalish, there is the ag industry exemptions. Council's aware they passed a policy back in 2021 just allowing that exemption for ag operations to apply for an exemption to banned roads. We've had a number throughout the years, and it's really, I think, a good tool for council to allow the move of commodities, ag commodities within the county without restriction on road bans. We've been monitoring for a couple of years. We haven't seen detrimental effects because of that program, so we're going to recommend that we continue that. So yeah, that's kind of the overview. I'm here to answer any questions if council has on this, or committee.
Councillor Phobes.
Under what circumstances wouldn't you issue a road use agreement?
Would we not?
Yes.
Definitely the condition of the road. So if there's a proposed road, and we've had that even a couple of times this year, where we've had a road use agreement, road use request for a substandard road with a haul on that, and we've asked that they actually extend out their travel route to a higher quality road so that we can save that road, basically save the degradation of that road. So even over this year, we've had that a couple of times now where we've rerouted them and then just performed more maintenance on that other road as well.
Go ahead.
Do all of the oil field companies have to have a road use agreement with us?
Through the chair, depending on what their application is. Majority of them do, because the majority of their requests are larger hauls. If they're servicing a well, if they're doing a frac, if they're doing a new drill, lots of equipment. Dozens, hundreds of trips in some cases. So definitely in those situations, they are always required to have one. I mean, smaller instances, we're not formed into a formal trigger point here, but typically we look at 10 trips per day or more than, I believe, 2 trips per hour is kind of where we look at that. Because it's really, in the oil and gas industry, we err on the side of caution with these, and we ask that they fill these out, and like I say, they typically do. The bigger industry, if it's through a development, or sorry, not a big industry, the development side road use agreements, either will request that through the development permit, that's a requirement to enter into that, and then it's an automatic, once the development permit is approved, that's a requirement for them to move forward. A lot of these applications are, that we have in that second development side is not necessarily through planning or through a development permit. So if they're upgrading a facility that doesn't require that sort of thing, if they're moving soil, that sort of thing, we've had that a couple times where we still require that development permit through there.
Councillor Cunningham.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you utilize the road data. So if a company comes in, they put their application in through that process, right?
Correct.
So if they're not doing that, or they choose not to do that, how do we, like if we know there's activity going on, how does the county enforce that?
And through that, it is through education. So we're made aware of them. If a call comes in, and that's where they normally come, is if there's a request through our planning, we're moving this equipment, we're doing this sort of thing that's outside of the road data process, then we request that they do that, that they get a road use agreement through it. So it is really through word of mouth, I'd say.
Go ahead.
So for example, my division's been very busy with oil and gas activity the last while. So I've had a lot of calls about the fracking that's going on, around 241 and 32.2. Do they have a road use agreement for that project?
Well, through the chair, like I say, any of those fracking operations, any of those heavy industry, there would be a requirement for those. Through the work that's happening west of the county here, every one of those roads has a road use agreement on it, yes.
So just when I look through, and I'm not sure if you folks are just providing this for information or if you want our feedback, but when I look through these agreements, it says all work should take place between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday. The one in my division is 24/7. So I'm not sure, like, is this standard, or do you alter them depending on the activity, or how does that work? Because the one in my division's probably 75 to 100 loads per day.
Right.
Yeah, and I know there was no dust control provided there or anything like that, so.
Okay.
Which I see is kind of commonplace in the road use agreement.
Right, and through the chair, that is, like I say, there's, we try and stay with the standard on here. If there's extenuating circumstances, like if there is, which doesn't sound like, is the case with 241 where there's zero residential around it, or it's not going to impact any of the landowners in the area, we may consider altering some of the conditions on these permits. I can't necessarily speak to the site-specific one you're speaking of there, but we can definitely look into it a little bit deeper and get you some answers on that if you like.
So, Mr. Zier, could you just review to us what you would like to see our residents do should they feel that there's a concern that's outside of this parameter?
Thank you. Definitely through the chair, speak with us, call us, contact us if you have any concerns with, educate your residents to contact the county. If they have any concerns on a certain haul, we can let them know what our requirements would be, what the company's requirements would be, and if they are exempt from any of these sort of things as well. Education is always easier to go through the main office here and make sure that the right data is being relayed out. So definitely recommend that going.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments? Reeve King.
So I guess I have a question around, sometimes after the activity of the actual drilling is stopped, they create these battery sites, and then there's loads in and out on a regular basis, numerous loads during a day.
Yep.
Would they have an extended then road use agreement? There's one that I know that comes off of, I think it's our Range Road 250, and then goes on to the 582, and then they go west through Sunny Slope and out to a battery actually that's in Mountain View. And I mean, there's numerous trucks coming in and out of that road. In fact, so many that when you go past where they're turning into the battery site off of our road, there's that, you know, they create that turn swale in the road. And so I'm just wondering, not specifically about that one, but in general, if we have a site like that and there's an established traffic pattern that's going to be extended over a long period of time, and in this case, it's been several years, do we maintain road use agreements on roads like that? And is the maintenance on those roads fall back to them?
Yeah, so through the chair, that is, these are primarily for development-based instances. So if there's a new application coming in, if it's a long-standing oil and gas application, I mean, right in here, we have 10 as our kind of our trigger limit there. So if that's where I come back to, if there is concern in the community that maybe they're exceeding those minimum there, we can look at talking to the company and maybe enhancing our request for service maintenance on those roads. Like I say, they're typically very accommodating with that sort of thing. I go back to if we were looking at it as outside of the oil and gas, a development-driven one. If it was a development that was generating that much traffic going forward as a consistent, we would have certain requirements of them to maintain a certain level, that sort of thing, or build up the road until we take it over. Whatever conditions council would have placed on it at that time. But the oil and gas, because they're so, they're not necessarily specific. Sometimes the wells are developed and then they're just really a pickup truck maintenance, except for a couple times a year when they're clearing the well. Again, if it's a situation like that where you may, residents may see a concern over higher traffic than that, that's where we get involved and where we can talk with the company about, okay, this is outside of our norm for maintenance there, and then have that conversation about what that longer term. We don't really want to have road use agreements like this in place in perpetuity, because that does tie a little bit more onus on our resources here. If we can work with the company on an understanding of what that looks like, that's usually more beneficial to us as a county.
So I guess when I think of this particular instance, I mean, there could be, I don't know, there could be 10 loads a day. I've never sat there and counted. But when you watch and it's all, you know, B-train tankers in and out of that site, constant traffic flow. And so that road does take a fair amount of use, and it's persistent. It's not like it's 10 days or 5 days. It's basically every day of the week, and it's a constant traffic. And so if it was a different type of development, let's say, just for sake of argument, somebody built an Amazon warehouse and it was 2 miles down a gravel road, we would probably ask that they upgrade the road and possibly hard surface it, just to protect the infrastructure, correct? And so in this case, we do have oil and gas companies that are using specific roads within the county on a very frequent basis. And so that was my question is, do we just kind of supervise the road use and the road use agreement goes away, or is there a longer term agreement maybe we should have in place with companies like that for very specific locations? Because it really almost is it's not a commercial development in terms of a business such as Amazon or somebody like that, but it is a permanent development that's taken place and is likely not going away anytime soon. And so that traffic flow pattern that exists on that specific road is not going to change anytime soon. And so if there's not a road use agreement that specifically applies to it, is there some type of agreement in a longer term form that maybe we should be looking at to develop? Because it is kind of a development that happens accidentally or as a result of oil activity. So.
Yeah, through the chair, what we want to be cognizant of and careful about is that this is, you're right, it isn't a development-driven development, but at the same time, as council's aware, these oil and gas energy industry are outside of our jurisdiction for development. So placing restriction on them can somewhat backfire on us in the future as far as if we, that's why we keep the healthy relationship with them, have a good response, have, like I say, we have time after time have, if we have a concern about a road, it is usually dealt with before we get there. And that's great because we have that relationship with oil and gas right now. I'm a little careful because knowing that these developments that they are operating and generating the traffic from are out of our jurisdiction, out of our right to manage and maintain. So the generation of the traffic on that, looking through the AER regulations, may be a little bit questionable as far as...
The road is ours.
The road is ours, correct, yes. But if, I mean, it goes down to, I mean, if we decided that we didn't like the way that road was being maintained and we shut the road down, we would likely be challenged on that sort of thing. So that's where we want to be careful with how much restrictions we place or how much conditions we place on an energy industry development that is out of our jurisdiction.
So are you saying there isn't a tool that we can use in this type of circumstance where it's oil industry out of our purview, but they're harming our roads regularly? What is the process that we as residents can have, I think is the question that's come out of that.
Through the chair, I think the method that we're operating with right now is ideal, where we have larger impacts on our roads being managed through a road use agreement that, like I say, ultimately is maintained and managed through those companies. This is a very valuable tool and a very valid tool. If we come up with a situation where this does not work anymore, we may need to look at other options for it, including identifying that to the companies, and if they're not willing to follow our requirements on this. Like I say, outside of our jurisdiction, outside of our mandate, we may need to look at different, elevating the topic outside of our jurisdiction.
So I guess my understanding then would be is if this road was to be pushed out or started to deteriorate because of the use that's on there, we don't have any mechanism by which we could recover costs to rebuild that road. It would be on us at that point.
Through the chair, I can't say that I've ever come up with that situation, so I can't speak accurately to if we were not receiving cooperation with our partners or with our industry contractors out there. All I understand and what I know is that these are, you look at the AER regulations, you look at what our responsibilities are and what limitations we can place on these applications. They are outside of our jurisdiction. So it may be challengeable by the company if we were starting to place higher and higher levels. If we ask somebody to pave a road up to a new fracking site because we feel that is appropriate for that.
Well, I guess my question really doesn't relate to that short-term activity.
Yep.
I can think of two locations that pop into my head right now where there's long-term activity and where as traffic turns in and out of a site, they really change the profile on the road and they change how that road sits in terms of usage. So I know if you weren't aware in particular of the one I'm thinking of right now, and you were highballing it down that road at night and you went over that swale that's created in their turn, who knows what happens. So the question becomes, how much do we apply extra maintenance to that road then to control that? The other site I'm thinking of, they come out and they turn onto our road out of their site, and they're pushing the shoulder out and flattening that road down and basically tipping the road on the side where they're turning all the time. And so again, what's our option in those circumstances? If it's not a road use agreement, does that maintenance then just fall back to us as the county? And the liability for the condition of that road, does that fall back to us as a county? And if so, if we are aware of those circumstances, are we applying more maintenance to those roads in specifics to keep them in the condition so that they're safe for the regular traffic? And that's what I'm just trying to get at. It's a long-term, and it's a long-term use of that road. What are we doing to mitigate the potential changes that are happening on those roads because of that traffic? And if it's not a road use agreement, does that mean it's just Kneehill County and our regular maintenance program, and those roads might see more maintenance than, say, another road would? And it's industry specific, right? It's one user, one site, and very specific. And so it's not like it's 10 different farmers hauling multiple loads of grain or cattle or whatever down that road, but it's a specific company using a specific location and a specific road. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is what the long term looks like, and who ends up picking up the maintenance, and do we then pay more attention to those roads, or what's our process, and where's the liability sit, I guess, for the condition of that road?
Thank you. And so yes, I think you're yes on all points, because really it is an industry development that comes into the county, no different than the other development that generates lots of traffic, whether it be development, commercial, industrial, agricultural. They all impact our roads. They all impact the quality and condition of our roads. If we have mechanisms to place some of that cost back on the applicant, we go as far as I feel we can on a lot of those. What I haven't delved too deep into here today is the ag industry, and looking at, we don't have road disagreements with any ag industry, short of if they're asking for that ag exemption for road bans. Knowing that they probably play the same, if not more of an impact into our road condition as oil and gas, depending on that site. So that's where I feel, and like I say, I'm here for the conversation. I'm here if council wants to committee wants to look at different directions on implementing these sort of things. I have seen a couple counties that have placed road use requirements on ag industry. I don't know what the response is, or even if that's something that council wants to look at in the future, and I haven't reached out to the counterparts to see the reaction on that, but I mean, it's an option. It's an option that we can definitely look at. Going back to placing the maximum amount of conditions, I say, but at the same time, they are still ratepayers. They are still adding to this. We have a service that we need to provide to these staff, and not just to make sure that the roads are fine for them to operate, but to make sure that the roads are safe for the remaining traveling public that, like you say, may come over and hit a push out that has occurred on there. So I'm giving you a high level of what we're doing now. If council wants to get a little bit deeper into conversations about other options we have for that, we can look at if we were to place stronger restrictions on oil and gas, what the repercussions may be of that. Like I say, if there's certain roads that are of concern to ratepayers right now, we can look at those on a case by case, maybe talk to the company and see if that's something that we can enhance the maintenance on their end to mitigate some of our own, because you're right. I mean, we're hitting those with our own resources a lot more because of that, I imagine, even if they are still supplementing it. So definitely open for the conversation with council here.
Councillor Cunningham.
So my next comment, say it very respectfully, but I understand we want to have a healthy relationship with our oil and gas partners. The most important healthy relationship I want to have is with our ratepayers, so they're always going to come first for me. I can say, because I happen to live on one road, there's been more oil and gas traffic on that road than there has been in ag in the past year. Tenfold, 100, like it's crazy. So, yeah, I'm never going to get behind a road use agreement for our ag partners, but anyhow, that's just me. But I know we're talking quite comprehensively about, increasing our peace officers. So my question would be then, where do we go with enforcement with these road use agreements? Because I know there was a development in my area in Division 5 that didn't follow their road use agreement. So I'm just wondering, like when we talk about, I see it blocking traffic, that happened. Speeding, so just wondering, how are we enforcing that and making sure that these companies, no matter what industry it is, are following through with their RUAs?
So before you start, Mr. Zier, to answer that question, I just want to clarify. You said your first priority is the ratepayers, and I just wanted to highlight that we understand that the oil industry is also a ratepayer. And so I just wanted to just get clarity if there was anything you wanted to say beyond that.
Well, when we talk about a healthy relationship, I think I want to make sure, because the calls that I've been getting in the last couple months, those are the relationships that I have with our ratepayers. I'm not getting calls from the oil and gas companies. And yes, of course, we don't want to get into the tax conversation right now, because I guess if we just came back from RMA and talked about the lack of tax actually that is being paid currently, but that's not the fault of the oil companies. But yeah, it's the ratepayers that I get the call from in the conditions of our roads. It's not the oil companies. So ratepayers are always going to be my number one priority, and that's just me.
Thanks for the clarity. Mr. Zier, are you able to answer her first question, or do you now need her to repeat it since I got off track?
No, that's good. Thank you, through the chair. So the question is about enforcement. The question is about how we enforce these road use agreements, basically. So yeah, we do, like I mentioned, we do monitor them throughout the haul if they're larger hauls. If there's concerns, like I say, I've received the ones that you're speaking of. We've investigated them, contacted the company, ensured that there was road use agreements in place. But it really is a combination of both our internal staff, if there's outside inputs that we may have. We can, maybe I'll let Director Gannon speak to just the enforcement on speeding and that sort of thing, what options we have, if you don't mind.
Mr. Gannon.
Thank you, through the chair. As per our program is correction first, so we do everything we can to educate, but if people are really abusing that, the discretion falls within the officer who's enacting that call or who's taking that call. It's on a case-by-case basis of what they see out there, and they are really trying to ensure public safety when they're looking at that portfolio. But education is the first key that the peace officers look at first. But if individuals are speeding through those areas, especially excessively, I'm quite certain that there's a ticket involved, but that's obviously to the discretion of understanding the situation, what's going on out in the field.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
So I got a question from a ratepayer that was asking, how do you determine the $1,000 penalty per trip? Like, how did you come up with that number is what I've been asked to ask you.
We did.
How did you come up with it?
So
I wasn't sitting in this seat when you guys came up with that number, so I've been asked to ask you.
I will let administration, but it came to council and we approved it. So that is our approval.
So how did administration come up with the $1,000 penalty?
So through the chair, our recommendation was this kind of making an impactful fine to make sure that it was adhered to. That's where we look at when we set fines for these sort of things. Something that isn't going to be just pushed off by the applicant, that actually has some meaning to it. So that's where we came up with that number for recommendation.
Go ahead.
So then after you guys do the education portion of it, how many of these fines have you handed out after you've educated people on it?
Through the chair, I don't believe we've ever fined anybody on these.
Okay, interesting, thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts? Mr. Gannon?
Thank you. I just want to add a little bit of clarity with regards to fines. We also look at comparatives out there and historically what happens as far as what the courts deem is reasonable. Having something that's placed in front of the courts potentially can see reasonability, but we do look at some benchmarking through the industry, and we do look at different files that we've had or other communities have had with regards to these fines, especially when we look at any type of enforcement action. We want to ensure reasonability in the correction. So they want to see level of effort. They want to see how we've communicated, how the file moves forward, really wants to see if there was a way of trying to resolve the issue with the individual or individuals pertaining to the issue at hand. So some of those fines, if we put a fine, let's say $10,000, we'd have to, prove the reasonability of that fine. Sometimes there's other charges depending on, from my experience, on impact, and some of that impact could be determined, but that takes a lot of work of showing the prior condition versus today's condition and really trying to prove that, and that's a real difficult world to live in.
And it also takes time. Reeve King.
So just to follow up on my earlier comments, I do realize that in a situation like the ones I'm talking about, the oil and gas companies that are involved definitely are probably paying a higher portion of tax off of the development that they have there. And so maybe it's justifiable for us to put an added or higher level of maintenance on some of those roads, as opposed to pushing it back on them. And so then I guess the only other concern that I would have that's maybe outstanding is just the liability about the condition of that road. And so maybe the solution to that is just, if there are roads like that, that we just need to flag them for the transportation department. I'm sure the grader operators are well aware which ones have those things on them. But I do know in conversations with ratepayers, there's often those questions are asked about how that road maintenance gets looked after and who's handling the cost of that. And so I definitely understand that the oil and gas companies who are ratepayers within Kneehill County pay a pretty high portion of what we collect as revenues throughout the county and other commercial entities. So I'm certainly not frustrated by the fact that they're actually using our roads or that they might be causing more damage than maybe the average individual would be. But the reality is that for me, the long-term liability on the condition of that road and just an awareness probably is a bigger issue than who actually pays for the day-to-day maintenance. So I was just curious more than anything about how we manage that long-term use of a road. And I had wondered if a road use agreement fit in there, but if it doesn't, then certainly what other measures are we using other than just regular maintenance? And that would, from what I hear from you, that's what I understand, is it just we apply maybe more maintenance and regular maintenance to those roads to maintain them in a way that's safe.
Correct. Yes, and just to add to that, you're right. I think the crux of it is very few operators out there actually want to abuse the road, or they see the long-term effects of it, of actually hindering their development as well. So a lot of times they're cognizant of the damage they do, and they will shut down. Given the situation, if they don't, we want to make sure that we educate them, and to a point where we redirect them, have that constant communication, and can shut down the road if necessary. So we're, especially in spring conditions, spring melt, and any conditions even like this where it starts to melt, we do stay a little bit more on top of our operators out there to make sure that the roads aren't starting to degrade even more.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Forbes.
So when I was reading this, I didn't see that there was anything in there that would address dispute resolutions with the companies if they're not in agreement. So for example, if you guys if any damage is not recorded in the initial inspection report and is deemed to be caused by the contractor, has this led to disputes over pre-existing conditions and responsibility for the repairs? So is there a clause in there to say how we're going to deal with a dispute if it should come towards us?
Through the chair, are you speaking of the energy industry or the private developer?
Well, most of this is based on the energy industry. It's not
Right.
based on ag, so I'm basing it on what you've told us, which is the oil industry.
Right, okay, thank you. Yeah, and like I say, we haven't, through the chair, we haven't gone to that level with a dispute or any of those kind of mechanisms, because again, it's stepping a little bit more outside of our bounds there that we haven't had to do in the past necessarily. So we haven't gone to that level of mediation or anything if we need to get out there. Ultimately, we stress our concern over the road on that. We do have the like I say, we do have the options, we do have the enforcement measures of banning that road, closing the road off ultimately. That is under our jurisdiction if we so feel, but those are our hammers. Those are where we would go to if we really saw a road being destroyed and the contractor said, no, I'm not doing anything about it. We're gonna shut that road down. We're gonna stop traffic on it to make sure that it's maintained at that point. And really at that point, that is where we go into a deeper conversation on how do we resolve this. Like I say, we haven't ever had to go to that point. And I think if we saw that reoccurring more and more, then we would probably need to look at a deeper mechanism on that, as well as understanding what our limitations are with these type of industries. It is quite different with oil and gas as opposed to a development that we have ultimate authority on, that we place conditions on and approval, all those sort of things. We have a lot more control over those non-provincial regulated sectors.
Go ahead, Councillor Forbes.
So then if this isn't in the policy, then they're not bound to it. And we really could be finding ourselves in a dispute resolution with someone. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And that's why policies come forward is we're protecting ourselves for a future event.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so through the chair, I mean, there are lots of options for council to consider here. We haven't currently had this in a policy. As I mentioned in the RFD here, there is an option to, if council would like to see something come back, either in policy form or in bylaw form. Bylaw, the benefit on that is you can actually impose fines right through this. That would be outside of the traffic safety bylaw. Yeah, the considerations for council to have on either of those options.
Councillor Cunningham.
One comment I get from a lot of ratepayers, and whether it's development, oil and gas, whatever it may be, is the dust control. And I think they really want to see that included in the road use agreements. I know I see it here in number 9, they're required if there's over 25 loads. I know there was a development in my division that didn't have that in it, that road use agreement with the 25 loads. So again, just what I'm hearing from the people is they would really appreciate the dust control on these more substantial developments.
Anything else? Go ahead.
I do have a couple questions. I think I'd want to request a closed session, advice from officials, if I could.
Okay. Mike, Mr. Hogan, do you have a comment for that?
Yes, through you, Deputy Reeve. Right now, as Mr. Zier has said, the county doesn't have this embedded into policy or bylaw format. Some municipalities have gone that route. In terms of a company, though, that is, if you're looking at, to use a term, hammer enforcement mechanism, the road use agreement is an agreement that they enter into. So if they, even without the policy, if they enter into that agreement and they're in violation of that agreement, there's still an ability there to enforce that agreement. There is, as Mr. Zier has said, those are really large enforcement tools, banning the road, shutting the road down. The one that is really outlined in there, the $1,000 per trip one, is not a, under the current road use agreement, is not a per instance offense. That is, in that clause that's in there, is if the road agreement is ended, so say a company is abusing the road, we end the road use agreement and they keep hauling. That's when that offense kicks in, under the wording in the agreement. That is not a, the company unloaded a piece of equipment and blocked the road, so they get fined $1,000. That's not worded to deal with that type of event. So there are abilities in there for us to go back. In terms of a dispute, if a company is entered into a road use agreement and they're damaging the road, if that road does ascertain damage and we can identify that from the pre-trip, from the pre-haul that we do, shouldn't say pre-trip, from the pre-haul that we do, and afterwards we go after them. There is some risk on their part that if somebody else comes along and damages the road, they're going to have to show us it was somebody else. But ultimately, they've entered into an agreement that said if that road is damaged while they're hauling on it, it's on them. So that's the that's some of those instances there. But I'll stop there.
Okay. And any other comments before we have a request to go into closed session? Do we have any comments regarding the request? Okay, we will go into closed session.
No, we need to have a vote.
We need to have a vote, sorry.
So is that a motion from the councillor?
That was a motion from,
I'll make the motion to go into closed session for advice from officials. Thank you.
and all those in favor? Carried. We are now closed. Okay, sorry for the delay there. We had a bit of technical difficulty. So, Councillor Phillips, could you just repeat your motion just to be sure we have that
Yes, I
recorded?
make the motion that the committee of a whole accept the information on road use agreements as information.
Thank you. So we have our motion. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Carried unanimous. Thank you. So we'll go back now to 2.1, Community Aggregate Payment Levy. And whenever you're ready.
Good morning, committee. Administration is here to bring forward the Community Aggregate Payment or CAP levy for your consideration. Before I begin, I would like to express my thanks to all individuals and departments that helped bring together the information required for this presentation. With that, let's begin. The Community Aggregate Payment Levy was introduced on January 1st, 2006 as a regulation within the Municipal Government Act. It is an initiative that is authorized by Council as a bylaw which allows municipalities to collect levies from private operators on aggregate shipments in tons from each private pit within municipal boundaries. Aggregate, according to the regulation, includes sand, gravel, and pit run gravel. The initial maximum levy rate was at 25 cents per ton, and recently the Government of Alberta amended the maximum levy rate from that 25 cents to 40 cents per ton. As such, the rates vary from 25 cents per ton to 40 cents per ton across municipalities. Since 2006, 40 municipalities have adopted the levy into their municipal bylaws. Additionally, this levy program is supported by the Alberta Sand and Gravel Association. And as of 2021, industry has contributed around $137 million to municipalities as a direct result of this program. The main goal of the CAP levy is to address the road repair and maintenance costs that arise from the heavy loads of aggregate shipments. As these large vehicles travel on our roads, their weight accelerates wear and tear, leading to deteriorated road services and impacting travel quality. Essentially, the CAP levy collects contributions from aggregate operators to offset community impacts from their pit operations. Another important goal established when this regulation was first implemented was to allocate CAP levy funds to specific identifiable projects that directly benefit the community receiving them. By setting this objective, it also helps achieve the secondary goal of reducing public opposition of aggregate operations. Imposing a levy on sand and gravel operators also provides a source of revenue for municipal needs. This revenue can demonstrate to the community the value of aggregate operations and what they bring to the community itself. It can help build positive relations between aggregate operations and the local residents. Additionally, there is potential to allocate some of the revenue from the levy towards researching reclamation techniques. This would ensure that the areas affected by the aggregate operations are restored to their original state in an environmentally responsible manner. Overarchingly, the funds received from the CAP levy can be used to mitigate local impacts, support community projects, and promote sustainable practices. The CAP levy has been adopted by 40 municipalities in Alberta. In addition to that, as shown on the screen, all municipalities bordering Kneehill County have enacted a CAP levy bylaw. Upon researching the various municipalities, administration has found that there were many shared characteristics in the implementation of this regulation. This includes the timing of reporting of the shipments, the way municipalities have asked operators to report their tonnage, the uniform levy rate, as well as establishing penalties and fines for failures to oblige by the bylaw. The revenue received by our neighboring municipalities, as well as the roads maintained by these municipalities as a result of the levy in 2022, are detailed here. The purpose of bringing forward this levy would be to ensure that Kneehill County can similarly enhance its infrastructure funding and address the associated costs of aggregate transportation. At this time, administration cannot provide a precise estimate of projected revenues from this program due to limited data on private pit gravel and sand processing within the county. However, confidence exists in the approach for allocating funding. All levy payments will be directed to the gravel reserve for the initial years. This strategy will ensure administration's ability to assess these revenue levels, enabling them to develop an effective utilization plan moving forward. The cap levy program generates yearly revenue ranging from $1,100 to over $1 million, depending on the amount of tonnage shipped within the municipal boundaries. Payments are processed when the aggregate operator issues a check to their respective municipality, and if passed, all initial revenue from this bylaw will be streamed to the gravel reserve as mentioned earlier. Across municipalities, a significant portion of the cap levy funds is allocated to raising awareness, and it is crucial for the county to transparently disclose how these funds are utilized. Projects funded by the levy should acknowledge the support through appropriate signage or mentions in their reports. This transparency helps demonstrate the value of aggregate operations to the local community. Historically, data verification has largely depended on the honor system. However, some municipalities have incorporated an inspection and production of records provision into their bylaws. This is where a designated officer has the authority to enter the lands where the pit is located to inspect operations and shipments. Only this officer can request copies of any records, and if any errors are found in the operator's reporting to the county is then authorized to correct the shipping tonnage records accordingly. So as for the benefits, implementing a cap levy bylaw provides Kneehill County with a crucial opportunity to recover revenue from aggregate shipments that might otherwise be lost. Currently, these shipments are impacting our infrastructure, and the funds from the levy could be instrumental in addressing those repair needs. Beyond mitigating the impact of pit operations, the levy also offers the potential to support various community projects and services after the initial years of adoption. The specific initiatives we can take will largely depend on the revenue generated. For instance, Sturgeon County utilized their cap levy funds to develop a comprehensive water monitoring program featuring 21 wells that continuously assess water quality and quantity. This illustrates the kind of valuable community benefits that can be realized through the effective use of cap levy funds. While the cap levy provides substantial benefits, it does have challenges that should be recognized. One of the primary concerns is the finite nature of gravel aggregate. Since gravel is a non-renewable source, the revenue generated from the levy is likely to decrease as gravel supplies are depleted. This gradual reduction could eventually lead to the end of the levy, affecting future funding. Another challenge is the lack of public awareness. Many community members may not know the contributions local operators make through the cap levy. To address this, it is crucial for Kneehill County to be transparent and proactive in demonstrating how these funds are utilized. The levy was established to build positive relationships between aggregate operators and local residents by investing in community projects. Kneehill County currently has 6 private pits within its boundaries, 3 gravel pits, 2 sand pits, and 1 clay pit. The location and sizes of each of these pits are provided on the table. The discrepancy between approved and current acres shows that the progression continues the pits are when they're reclaimed. According to the cap levy regulations outlined in the MGA, the levy applies exclusively to private operators of sand, gravel, and pit run gravel. Therefore, operators of clay pits or other non-gravel aggregates are not subject to the cap levy regulation. Should the cap levy bylaw be passed by council, it will only pertain to those private aggregate operators in the county. The goal with this cap levy is to bring in the unrealized revenue from private aggregate operations and use that revenue to impose infrastructure that can be deteriorated as a result of hauling the aggregate. This initiative ensures that the local community benefits directly from aggregate extraction activities occurring within its jurisdiction, addresses the county's financial needs, and promotes responsible resource management. Thank you for your time, and now I open the floor to questions.
Councillor Phelps?
I guess one of my first questions comes from an actual owner of one of these sites. What specific information needs to be included in the quarterly shipping reports, and what is the process for submitting these reports?
So in the quarterly shipping reports, there's going to be information that the operator will have to provide, such as the total sand and gravel shipped from the pit, as well as shipments that are exempted from the cap levy, which will be included in the form. They take the exempted shipments, subtract that from the total cap levy amount, and then that gets them their total aggregate levy payable. And so that would be in the tonnage form that they receive from the county.
Go ahead.
Do we have a staff member dedicated to doing this once, if this should choose to get passed? Do we have a designated person that can actually go in and make sure that these companies are doing what we're asking them to do?
Mr. Hogan, or, no, sorry, Mr. Seaver?
Yeah, so thank you. Through the chair, we plan on utilizing our existing operations staff, administration staff, to, like I say, we're proposing right now that we go through the honor system, which is what the majority of communities actually utilize. So we would be basically receiving the reports. We're sending out the request for reports, receiving the reports, and then processing the payments. That is a fairly minimal, like Ms. Khaled said here, with 5 eligible pits quarterly is not a huge draw on our resources, so.
Go ahead.
It's not a huge draw on your resources, but it might be a huge draw on the people that own these pits. Because now they're going to have to do paperwork they never did before. And so now we're putting a burden on who they are and how much money they can make.
Mr. Hogan?
Through Mr. Chair, that is true. This does put an additional burden on those operators. It's one that 2/3 of rural municipalities have opted to make and are realizing revenue from. So, and it is one that is supported by the Alberta Sand and Gravel Association, which is their overarching body. The information they'd be required to put together, I believe, are on pages 23 and 24 of the agenda package. So that is the forms that would be sent out. And really it's the amount of aggregate that they're hauling and what is excluded from there, all of records that I would suggest they have already. In terms of whether they're hauling clay, whether they're hauling sand, whether they're hauling gravel or pit run.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. King, Reeve King.
So I note in our policy that's proposed that we talk about aggregate, and our definition of aggregate includes gravel and sand individually or in combination. And I noted in the map that we provided that we identified a clay pit. Is this bylaw intended to have a levy on that clay pit, or is it just sand and gravel that we're talking about?
Through the chair, it will only be sand, gravel, and pit run gravel.
Okay. So it's just sand and gravel, so that pit that's identified, the clay pit, would be outside of this levy if we were going to apply it.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
So would the levy be applied to any hauling of fracking sand?
So,
Sorry, Mr. Hogan, go ahead.
dear Mr. Chair, my understanding of the cap levy is that it's on the actual, it's called the miner or the extractor of the resource, not on the haul itself. So that is when the material is actually leaving the pit. It's on whoever is owning that pit is the one that's incurring that levy. And they would be, I think the common practice is that whether it's 25 or 40 cents is they're passing that on to the consumer.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I think I've got this clear, but I just want to clarify. So then if we have a company that's hauling, like they're getting their product from outside Kneehill County, but bringing it into the county, they would not be subject to a levy through Kneehill County because they would be subject to that in the other municipalities. Is that correct? Okay.
Go ahead, Ms.
Yeah, sorry, thank you through the chair. So that would, if the benefiting or if the creation municipality has a levy, they would be paying that levy through that, process through that existing municipality. We wouldn't be able to retain it. It's only for, as Mr. Hogan mentioned, site county-generated gravel, sand, and pit run.
Go ahead, Councilor Cunningham.
So I guess just to clarify, because in the document, like we're talking about, you know, the road use and some of the, you know, maintenance of our roads and what has to happen because of some of this hauling. So I guess really a lot of that hauling could occur in Kneehill County. So I'm just wondering, so, but they wouldn't be subject to anything even though the majority of the work is happening in Kneehill County. Correct, okay.
Mr. Zier, do you mind?
Thank you. So, through the chair, like I said, we're unable to reach out to outside municipal applicants to actually retain that value. All we would be to is much similar as if we had internal gravel operators that were sending to outside municipalities. They wouldn't be able to pull from our cap levy or any kind of revenue from that either. So it does go both ways.
Councilor Phobes?
Will you be holding public consultations with the people that produce the gravel and sand within the county to inform them of this? Like, will they get a chance to weigh in on this bylaw?
Mr. Hogan?
Through the chair, if that depends on the direction of council. This is a council bylaw that we're putting forward for you as a potential revenue source. It's one that other municipalities use. It's ultimately up to council whether you go forward with it or not. As we've seen in the report, about 2/3 of rural municipalities do, about 1/3 do not. So that would be up to council. Any bylaw is challengeable that you put forward in terms of a specific engagement portion. Again, that's up to council whether you would want to do this as providing information that we are doing this or seeking feedback from those 6, and that would have be accompanied by the question what you would do with that feedback, which again is a council decision.
Councilor Phobes?
I guess I'm gonna get this question, so I'm gonna ask it. In regards to our own gravel pit, we are not be paying this levy. And people, so can I just get the Coles note when someone phones me on this so I know what to tell them, please?
Go ahead, thanks.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question one more time?
Oh, gosh, I lost my train of thought now.
Co-levy on how this
Thank
works?
you. Yes, so
in comparison
all
to
of the
municipality.
gravel that are privately owned are going to incur this levy, but as a county, we don't have to pay that levy. Can you just explain to the people that would be listening why we don't do that for us?
So this would be a revenue source that we use to put back into the infrastructure of the county, and the private gravel and pit owners would incur that levy in a way that we can put it back into the community.
Go ahead, Councilor Phobes.
So the tax that we collect off of the land that because we redesignate when we make them gravel pits and stuff, the tax we collect isn't going to cover the cost of the road the beat up on the road of them leaving their industry.
Mr. Hogan?
Through the chair, their taxes are the same as anybody that pays taxes, and so they're funding all municipal operations in some level. The direct answer to the question is that legally we're not allowed to impose that on our own gravel pit. So in the cap levy legislation that's included in the RFD, Section 6, exemptions from policy, no levy may be imposed on the following classes of shipments of sand and gravel, and 6.1b reads, a shipment from a pit owned or leased by a municipality for a use or project that is being undertaken by or on behalf of the municipality. So legally, we can't impose this on ourselves.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Phillips.
Because I have gotten this from someone who owns this, it appears as if you're just trying to bring in more revenue instead of controlling your spending. This is their words, I'm repeating them because that is their statement.
Mr. Hogan?
So through the chair to Councillor Phillips, is that a question you're asking, or is there?
In a way, yes, it is. I mean, we're doing this to them. Are we doing it because we're not managing what we're doing on this end, or are we managing it on this end but wanting more money to be brought in? Because their next question is what is ECDEV doing? We're paying for people to be there. And so I just would like clarity for whoever is listening to know that I've asked this question on their behalf.
So then I think the answer is they can form their own opinions by looking at our budget, which is ultimately approved by council. So that is a council discussion around the approval of the budget and what we're achieving with that budget spending. The few $1,000s that are going to be brought in by this are not going to impact economic development. They're not going to impact there. It is a potential revenue source that's available to council, and one that we're highlighting that historically we've never used. So there is an option for council to look at a small amount of revenue generation through this, which their own industry actually supports that municipalities do this.
So, yeah, and for me, the question, just basically to reiterate what you said, is I think we've challenged our administration quite well at finding ways to save money, be more efficient with the money. And of course, there's always ways to continue to do that and to grow that. But one of the ways to be efficient is also how do we generate revenue? Our revenue has declined over the years. We need to pay attention to whether or not we're staying with what's the current common way of generating revenue as well. And so that would be why I'm willing to look at this.
Go ahead with Councillor Cunningham.
Councillor Cunningham.
So Mr. Hogan might have kind of already answered this for me, but my question was, do we know what the administration cost of this program will be? And how will that balance? Like I think I heard earlier, we don't have an estimate of what this might bring in. So I'm just wondering, like, are we going to be at a loss to administer this? Like because Mr. Hogan just made the comment about a few $1,000s. It's a small amount. So I'm just wondering, you know, we talk a lot about the excess pressure that we're putting on administration to our peace officers. I'm just wondering if this is going to balance out, if that makes sense.
Mr. Hogan.
Through the chair, we believe there will be a return on investment on this. We're not predicting that this is going to be a large revenue generator. In fact, when we're looking at the draft budget discussions, we're looking at a few $1,000s, but for sending out quarterly paperwork to 5 or 6 providers and receiving that information back is not going to, the cost to the county is going to be negligible on that.
Thank you. Councillor Reeve King.
So I guess the only comment I'm going to add to this conversation is every one of these operators who is providing aggregate within Kneehill County, if they are bringing aggregate from outside of Kneehill County, they're already paying this levy to whichever pit they're pulling from. And I do know that some of these companies that are providing sand and or gravel to residents within Kneehill County, all of that aggregate that they're providing is not necessarily sourced specifically within Kneehill County. And so if they are bringing aggregate in from any county that surrounds us, from those pits, they're paying the levy right now. they're not necessarily reporting on it because the operator of that pit themselves would be doing the reporting, but they're paying that levy. And I'm gonna guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, I'm gonna guess that when they pay that levy on that aggregate that's coming in, it's factored into the price of the aggregate. So for us as Kneehill County to choose to charge this, if I look at the map, we're the significant other who's not charging an aggregate fee. And the question for me is this something we want to, and I'm going to use the word impose on our aggregate operators who are currently working in Kneehill County or not? And that's really what it comes down to. It's a source of revenue. As I've heard Mr. Hogan and others say, it may not be a great source of revenue, but it is a source of revenue. And from what I heard Ms. Khalid say about the use of the funds would be to maintain infrastructure around the gravel pits and sources of aggregate. So ultimately, the pit operators are going to be the ones who benefit mostly from the fee that we're going to charge. So anyway, it's more of a comment than a question. I think the reality is in the world that these gentlemen and ladies operators who are providing aggregate within Kneehill County, they are likely, if they're sourcing outside of here, already paying this fee. And the question becomes, do we want it here or not? And for me, that's where the conversation ends up. Are we willing to charge 40 cents a ton to the operators in Kneehill County and use that as a source to maintain roads or not?
Thank you for that. Councillor Cunningham.
So just a little further to that, I think in the RFD, it also says not only maintenance of roads, but new public facilities and bylaw officer training. So I guess I would question whether the few $1,000s we're going to collect would cover all that. But I think the one thing, and Reeve King did use the word impose, I think we have to realize that if we do this, we're probably imposing an increase on this product for our ratepayers as well. The cost of doing business, where does that get passed on to? That's usually the consumer, right? So, I mean, if we're looking at I estimated $11 to $12 a load. I mean, it could be possible that one of these producers might double that cost to cover the cost of the administration that they will be required. So I just think we have to be aware too that there could be an increase in the cost to the product for our ratepayers as well.
And I think that's a fair thing to notice, absolutely. And I also would counter that with, we need to find sources for revenue, so it's going to come from some force. If we can bring in revenue from other sources, that limits the amount of taxes we have to put on all people too. So it's a vicious circle of change that makes us have to take a look at how we are in line with the rest of the province so that we're not falling behind and making ourselves less sustainable. It's also the reason why we're in front of this.
Can I make another comment?
Reeve King.
The other comment I'm going to make is that not all the aggregate that's pulled out of Kneehill County stays in Kneehill County. And when I get a quote on gravel from an operator in Kneehill County, the price of that gravel really doesn't change except for distance by which it travels. So if I'm getting a trucker within Kneehill County who has a gravel pit to supply gravel, but that gravel's coming from Sundre, the price of the actual tonnage on the gravel doesn't change, it's the freight that changes for me. And I know that we have operators within Kneehill County who are shipping virtually everything that's coming out of their pit outside of Kneehill County. And it's going to cities and other places that have golf courses, and that sand is being used in those environments. And the price that's being charged for that aggregate is competitive with whatever it would be anywhere else. So for us to charge the 40 cents, I don't really see that as being problematic because they're already competing on price based on aggregate that's coming from pits that are paying the 40 cents. So, I don't know. I think that if we said every ounce of aggregate and sand that's extracted in Kneehill County stayed here and never went anywhere else, and is not competing against aggregate that's already paying that 40 cents or 25-cent levy, then I would say maybe we're putting an unfair burden. But in my mind, we're competing with aggregate that's paying that price. We are shipping aggregate out of Kneehill County without that levy attached to it. And I guess the other bottom line for me is the Sand and Gravel Association agrees this is a reasonable thing to do. Anyway, my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Zier.
And through the chair, just to comment on the Alberta Sand and Gravel, they are, as Mr. Hogan mentioned, very large proponents of this, not just in agreement with it, actually supportive of it. They see the benefits of what this perception-wise on the industry is and how it's a beneficial perception-wise. So it can actually show back, as Ushba mentioned here, there's some organizations that actually put up signage that this project has been funded through levies and that sort of thing. Like, they see it as a real benefit for bettering the viewpoint as we look at huge loads and the hindrance that some of these hauls are on the residents. They can see that as the back end of really what they're getting out of it as an extra little step of promoting their industry. So,
Great. Councillor Cunningham.
Would a concrete company be subject to this levy?
Go ahead, Mr. Zier.
through the chair, as far as sending out the concrete with the gravel mixed in it, or is that what you say? No, and through that, as we mentioned, is really for site generated. So unless they're generating that gravel on site and exporting it out of the site, it would be only for those three the three products, three commodities.
But I'm correct in thinking that it's likely they're paying for it in the cost of the gravel they put into the cement.
Through the chair, likely. Like I say, going back to our surrounding municipalities and the input in, I know in the past when we've purchased gravel through the county from outside sources, we've paid that cap levy on every ton that we've brought into this county here for our own use, which means that a lot of producers are passing that cost right on to they're not absorbing it, they are passing it on. Again, that's a pretty common practice to in that industry to just carry on. It's a known cap levy. Almost every community in the province has gone to the 40 cents now that they have the allowance. Like I say, this has been the regulation's been in existence since 2006, so majority, or like 2/3 of them have seen the benefit and have signed on to this program.
Thank you. Councillor Christie.
We've poured a lot of cement in our yard and there's not very much concrete grade gravel in Kneehill County. It's got to come from Pine Lake or Sundre.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions, I should have said. Councillor Cunningham.
I'll get asked this, so I have to ask the question. Are we considering levies on any other industry in Kneehill County at this time?
Mr. Hogan.
Through the chair, the item that's before you is specific to the three commodities mentioned in it, and it's because it is backed by provincial legislation and regulation. So in bringing a potential revenue source, however small, forward, which we feel has been the mandate given to us by council, we have brought this forward and we're considering this as of anything else that's not on our radar now, but this is the one specific one that is in place through provincial legislation.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
I guess the question I have is how will the municipality, how will we allocate these funds to ensure consistent and effective use for infrastructure projects, especially during the years with lower revenue from this? Because if we're doing it on revenue, what do you do on the years when you're budgeting for stuff and it's lower, but you don't know it's lower yet because they haven't filed all their reports?
And I think that kind of was addressed with your risk slide. Do you want to go back to that, if you don't mind? And then you could answer further as well if you would like, Mrs. Khalid or Ms. Khalid. Yep. Sorry, there we are. Thank you.
Through the chair, as mentioned before, the revenue that's going to be coming in from this levy is, we're looking at a couple $1,000s, not enough to move the scale if it's not as we intended it to be. And then as it's going into the gravel reserve, we will have other funding to come in place of that.
Mr. Hogan?
To build on what Ms. Khalid has said, if this goes into reserve or is designated to other projects, it'll be a portion of the funding. It's not anticipated that any projects will be dependent on this funding. So there isn't a risk factor necessarily in terms of we're canceling a project because yearly revenues from this are low. This is not going to necessarily fund the entirety of projects by itself. Would be considered supplemental funding either through contribution to reserves, as Ms. Khalid has said, or providing some funds to other projects that are ongoing to help support those projects. But those projects we do not anticipate would be dependent on this.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer what you were looking for, Ms. Phobes? Okay. So we need to make a motion unless you have any other questions. We need to decide whether we'd like, great, Reeve King.
So I'd make the motion that the Committee of the Whole recommend administration to bring forward the community aggregate payment cap levy bylaw with any to council for first reading. So my assumption would be is that if we make this motion and it's going to come forward to council, there's possibility for further conversation. So I'll make the motion and we can go from there.
Thank you. Yes, first reading is a great place to discuss more details that we might see within the bylaw if we wanted to, or if it comes up in the meantime. So, Councillor Woodstock.
Just a question to the motion. We're gonna determine the levy at council level? Or that's gonna be coming back with one of the recommendations?
It's in here.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Let Mike answer that.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Hogan.
Through the chair, that would form part of the bylaw. So that would be a discussion when the bylaw comes forward to council.
Yeah, because we haven't determined whether it's 2 bits or 40 cents or anything yet, have we?
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Just a comment, I know in the proposed bylaw that's in here and on the documentation that's in our materials, it is in there at 40 cents. In the...
I never got into the details.
No, but I'm just saying, in the proposed bylaw and on the paperwork that's attached, it is proposed to be 40 cents per ton. So.
Thank you.
Which again could be discussed and changed after we have that in front of council. Yeah. So So we have a motion. Any other comments to the motion? Okay, I will call the question. We have a motion that the Committee of Whole recommend administration to bring forward the community aggregate payment called CAP levy bylaw to council for first reading. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Anyone needing a break? We're doing okay?
Sure.
Keep going? Good. Okay. Thanks a lot. So now we're gonna move into what I threatened to have as first off, and the nice gentle waiting of our staff. We're going to go to 2.3, to policy 13.2, greater gravel services. And whenever you're ready, Mr. Conklin.
Thank you very much. So this policy, greater gravel level service, has been brought to committee of whole back in June of 23, and as well as council in September of 23. So administration has reviewed and updated the policy once again to incorporate some recommended changes as well as additional revisions that we deemed necessary at the time. So I think we can kind of go through section by section of the discussed changes and have a conversation on those. Administration is still proposing the removal of the ability for ratepayers to use private laneway, snow plowing, and blading. This would be still provided for the winter of 2024 and 2025 till the spring, and then we would be doing public consultation or notice throughout the winter saying that this is the last winter of that and going that route. Reference for the summer and winter maintenance of paved and chip sealed roads is added into the policy. The administration has included revisions to the minimum grader rotations. So it is now worded as 2 to 6 rotations based on the needs of the road and then at the discretion of the supervisor to determine if a road needs more maintenance than current or the 6 rotations. The winging reference is in there for winter maintenance so that we are able to have our graders out there preparing for that next snowfall, making sure that we're in the best case scenario when we do get that snowfall. Our dirt trail maintenance policy has been combined within this policy. With our policy currently states that the dirt roads would be bladed twice a year at minimum, with additional maintenance to be completed at the discretion of the road supervisors when needed. And then one of our change in level of services is our road regraveling program. So administration is recommending that we reduce our regraveling program from 400 miles down to 300 miles a year. This change in services came from our new blading techniques. We're finding more gravel in our road surfaces that we're able to maintain and keep them in a better shape without the consistent need of regraveling to ensure that roads are not deteriorating. We are going to implement a program of 20 to 25 sites that we're monitoring and doing quarterly updates on. With the 300 miles annually being the goal, it is not a strict limit. If weather events happen where we need the material on the road, then obviously it needs to go on the roads to maintain that safe road conditions for all users. Yeah, I think that's a good starting point for.
Any questions of our presenter? Councilor Cunningham.
So can you just remind me for the snow plowing, what we're charging the ratepayers for that service currently?
So currently, through the chair, is currently a cost recovery program at $220 an hour, or $220 an hour with minimum of 1 hour due to travel time that's included in that. So a lot of the times the driveways don't take that long, but we gotta drive out to those sites after we've passed them usually.
Go ahead.
So I'm having deja vu from the last time we talked about this, but I'm going to fight for this one. I know we talk a lot about the quality of life for the residents in Kneehill County, and I think last time I brought up, if we've got some, elderly people that are still living in the county, if there's anything, in my opinion, that we can do to keep them living there, and if it's just to have their roadway plowed, I'm all for that. So, and especially when we're looking at it as a cost recovery, I think there's been conversations with other municipalities that were actually quite shocked that we actually do get cost recovery on this. So it sounds like it's not a high time. I'm wondering, would it be possible to ever do it when we're in that area anyways? Or I guess obviously we can't predict the snowfall.
So through the chair, ideally that would be a best case scenario as we're going by. That's not usually how it happens. It usually happens half a day later when we're already out of that area. So currently in the last year, between September 23 and September 24, there was 12 users that used this program, a total of 15 times. It is a very big liability for the county to have the size of machinery we do in a lot of these sites. A lot of them are not designed to have that grader in there. That's usually why they don't have their own equipment. I guess that's not the right words. They're just not proper size sites to have a grader in there with a 16-foot moldboard and trying to turn around. It is just a high liability for that equipment to be in there and not knowing what's under the snow.
Go ahead, Councilor Cunningham.
Thanks, just for a follow-up on that. So when we are doing them, are they signing some kind of a waiver to we
Through the
wouldn't
chair,
be-
yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
they are.
Thank you. Councilor Phillips.
So can you specifically tell me from one year to the next how our insurance has increased due to us doing this service for the residents?
Through the chair, I cannot speak on that.
Someone get me that information then, please?
Yeah.
Or is that not in my realm?
Mr. Hogan.
Through the chair, I don't, to address a question, I don't think you would see this on the insurance increase. You would see this as if something was damaged. And that goes back to Mr. Conkin's comments around using the right sized equipment. The liability in question isn't a insurance driver cost. It's if something happens on site because we clip a car or we clip something or damage something that way, we're incurring more risk in that regard.
I can see that. Councilor Phillips.
So then that comes back to the waiver that they're signing, is it not? Doesn't the waiver say we're not responsible if we come into your yard? And I guess my other question is graders don't come through the town of Torrington, you put a blade on the front of the truck, why can't a truck with a blade on the front go and clear a laneway for them? If that's not possible, I'm just curious.
Mr. Conklin.
Through the chair, that is something, if council wishes for administration to look into, we could definitely look at different options of that. It would be definitely a cost recovery program as well. We would be utilizing those assets. Once again, it would not be a drop of the hat. We could make it out there because those trucks are allocated to clearing their dedicated areas first. Definitely an option that administration can look into and bring back if council wishes.
Just me.
I am so sorry. Councilor Christie, I had to think about your name. Go ahead.
A grader's not a very agile piece of equipment. I have 3 different pieces of equipment in my yard that all push snow, and there's a huge difference from the little ones to the big ones, and ours are all smaller than the grader. There's a lot of public snow removal companies out there that we're at cost recovery, we're competing with them, so I think that's a mistake for me.
Councilor Phillips.
So then the revenue we pulled in, did I not read somewhere that you pulled in $5,000 last year in revenue on the roads?
Through the chair, approximately $5,000 that we brought in for a cost recovery for our machineries to be out there.
So was that a profit, the 5,000?
That is a cost recovery covering what we have spent to go out there to complete the tasks.
Mr. Zier.
Thank you for that. Just to add to the conversation, I think through the chair, the consideration is not so much if we're making money or losing money on this, because we have, and council's approved the increase in the rate to at least cover our costs, what we think is our costs on that. Primarily what we're looking at is we're taking away from the core purpose of our equipment to service the public lands, to make sure that the roads are clear for all users. So yes, even with coming back a half day later or something to clear these things, or utilizing different pieces of equipment, it is still taking away from the primary use of that equipment, which is to clear public lands, to clear the road right-of-ways. That's one aspect. The other aspect is going back to liability. Now, I'll still hold on that train. Yes, we have them sign a waiver agreement that hopefully indemnifies us to a point. If we end up, I mean, we're entering sites now that have uncontrolled conditions. So we have potential people walking around. We don't have control over a lot of the things when we enter these private lands. So there is a potential for under snow obstructions that we could hit, vehicles that, depending even what kind of equipment we use, we may not be able to maneuver around them. And really, the liabilities go deeper into, like I say, public people walking around and actually hitting them. And that's, I mean, all the indemnity that we have in that, we're still going to get litigation against us in that sort of situation. So even if we go through, even if we have that instance occur, we may still be brought into a litigation where we end up being huge costs on us, even if we win. So all these sort of things play into the conversation of why we are stressing and kind of steering away from this. Again, it's back to council on if you're comfortable with that. If we give you all the information here, if you're comfortable with that risk tolerance, we are open to the direction of council. Like Mr. Conk has mentioned, some communities, some municipalities in the province continue to do this. The majority have gone away from it for those instances that I just brought up. So.
Well, for me, my 2 bits is we are looking again at ways to be more and more responsible with our taxpayers' dollars. And when we take risks that make us more likely to be liable for things, we're risking taxpayer dollars. And not unlike any other type of government agency or department, we here at municipalities too have to again think about what is the primary purpose, and is the risks going beyond, if we were to go beyond our primary purpose, is the risk justifying that act of kindness? And I think that's what we're trying to balance here. For me, I feel as though we don't want to we've talked about it with other things, let's not take away from private industry. We have private industry out here. We have neighborly people who will do that. We have family members who might do that. And so this is a great way to secure our expenses for the things that we actually need the money for. That's my personal opinion. Any other comments around this discussion? Councillor Woodstock.
Thanks, Deputy Reeve McGee. Even though we have hold harmless agreements signed with the people that utilize this service, I'm sure you can get 2 lawyers to say that it's not sufficient. You can probably get a whole bunch of lawyers to say it's not sufficient. So regardless of, it's not only the damage that we could possibly cause to some of their infrastructure, sometimes maybe we could cause damage to our own equipment. I don't believe that, I mean, it's nice to have a phone call away and whenever you're in the area to have your lane plowed, but like you say, that the equipment that we're using is not designed for that. I did see you guys standing around, what was it, a 150 grader? At the trade show. That's a little bit smaller of a grader. That could probably be used, but what are we looking at? 800 grand for that puppy? I'm sure you guys got a price on it. Anyway, we can't,
They didn't because I said they couldn't ask for a price.
Oh,
Excellent
And they listen to you.
leadership there,
Never
Reese.
listened to me when I was reading, anyway. Anyway, I think, I mean, as much as I don't want to take service away from some people that use the service, I think we'd be prudent to shy away from what we've been doing and continue figuring out a way that maybe have some sort of database that if they phone and say, where's a grader that we could rent? I don't know if that's up to us. Well, I guess we couldn't do that anyway because we're not allowed to do that kind of stuff. But I'm sure there'll be ads in the paper someplace. But my concern is damaging our equipment and getting into litigation.
Thank you. Reeve King, I'm really messing up
Whoever.
names.
So I don't have much trouble with the private lane stuff as I do about changing our spec on how often we gravel roads and the frequency of graveling. And so I know there was some conversation around the assessment that we've done and the new way we're blading the roads and the amount of gravel we're managing to keep on roads. One of the things I constantly hear from residents and industry within the county is we have significant roads with not enough gravel or insufficient gravel or gravel that's not a proper spec. And so when we start to talk about taking 100 miles of re-graveling out of the program, I know there's significant savings there. I did read the material around how you're going to select sites and monitor those sites to determine whether we're actually graveling at sufficient frequency or not. And because of that, I'm probably willing to consider a change in the way we're graveling our roads as long as that monitoring is being done and as long as we're being provided with information around the level of gravel that's being maintained on our road surfaces. I do know that one of the things as a counselor I hear more about than anything else is the amount of gravel on roads and what those road conditions are like in less than favorable weather, particularly rainfall events in the summertime. So it is a concern to me, much, much greater concern to me than private lane grading. I think that when you talk about the number of kilometers that we have to maintain that are gravel, and the amount of gravel that we're using, I recognize that's a huge cost to the county and the re-graveling program is expensive. But this reduction, you're gonna have to prove to me that it's a valid way for us to go. I'm willing to give you the time. I'm not sure I'm willing to enshrine it in a policy, but I guess I'm sitting here saying, show me, right? I need some actual evidence that we can go from 2 to 7 years kind of thing in a re-graveling program and still maintain road conditions at a level that our residents expect and that is considered safe and reasonable. So from that point of view, that's my whole concern with this change revolves around that whole change in strategy. And I know there's significant money to be saved if we were to do that. So.
Go ahead, Mr. Conklin.
Through the chair. Yeah, there is some significant money that is possibly saved in this. That's where we have it written in there that 300 is a goal. It's not a strict limit. It is purely for those circumstances where weather events happen. Our wet years seem to be fewer and fewer between, or farther and farther apart, sorry. So the 2 to 7 years for the re-graveling, that is just a, certain roads don't need to be re-graveled every 2 to 3 years. As the policy previously stated, they definitely can withstand that difference, and it is definitely a case-by-case basis. These sites need to be on all different types of soil conditions, all different ends of the county. What happens east of Three Hills is very different than what happens west of Acme for soil conditions and gravel conditions in every sort of weather event for sure. So that needs to be monitored closely across the entire county, and that is our goal there, to try this and see if it's working, and if it's not, then we're able to adapt and change that and make sure the roads are safe for users.
Well, more than once, we've challenged you to find ways to be more efficient with our funding, and I think this is trying to address that very big request that we've made. So I do appreciate the suggestion. Councillor Phobes, I realized I was amiss of catching you last time. My apologies, but please go ahead.
So I need to go back to the snow plowing in the residents of the 12 users that we have. So I did notice in here, please correct me if I'm wrong, I did notice that we'd be stopping the service in 2025. Is that correct?
Through the chair, it'd be the spring of 2025. We would maintain the program throughout the winter so that they have time to adjust and find someone for the next winter.
So if liability is the biggest issue on why we're not doing this, why are we not stopping it immediately once this comes into effect?
Through the chair, I believe it was intended to give residents enough time to find another source to conduct their snow clearing. If that is the wish or the way council wants to go with it, we definitely can change that so that it's effective immediately and do the public notice in that aspect, but it is ultimately up to council and what direction they want to go. We were just trying to provide, or administration was trying to provide enough time to find those different resources.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Phobes.
So then the 12 users, will you be making the personal phone call to them, a letter? Well, how will you be informing them for the public part of this?
Through the chair, we would use our communications officer and online posts. I'm sure there's many options for newsletters, emails, whatever is an option. The users vary year to year. When they call, we would be able to let them know as well if they were still calling for that service, that the service is no longer there. So,
Councillor Cunningham.
So just further to Reeve King's point, I think it isn't just about the snow plowing. I do have concerns with the kilometers of gravel as well. The comments that I get around town, around wherever I'm at, is our taxes are going up and the services appear to be going down. And so that's, I guess, where my concern comes from too. Just to where I just would like you to expand a little bit on the grader rotation. Like it says, it's now set at 2 to 6, and it looks like depending on the road supervisor, I think there is a traffic component into that. I know in our budgeting we did budget for some new traffic counters. Just wondering if that will be used to determine the amount of traffic in an area. I do get a lot of comments that back in the day, the Fisher Davis Road was graded once a week, and now it's about every 2 to 3 weeks. So just wondering if we're going to be using the traffic counters to determine usage, or how you're going to decide on that 2 to 6 rotations on the various roads. Just if you could expand on that a bit.
absolutely, through the chair. So the 2 to 6 rotations is to give some flexibility on roads that aren't utilized, that do not, they actually benefit from being bladed less times a year. The 6 rotations is that average throughout the county, your average use road. There is certain roads within the municipality that are bladed well above that 6 times a year, depending on usage and conditions. I know in the Fisher Davis example, we've done a lot of base stabilization in that road to help make it so that we aren't blading it every year. Our new blading technique is also helping. It's a tight blading technique, helps lock that gravel in better in most situations. Obviously, there's still washboard that can appear. So that's just giving the road supervisors that flexibility to allocate those graders to the proper roads that are needing care instead of blading a road that is in perfectly fine condition.
So part of refining the way we do business and caring for our roads has enabled us to not have to be there as often when we compare over those many years, is what you're saying, correct?
Correct, it is added to that.
Go ahead, Mr. Zier.
Yeah, and just to add to Mr. Conkin's, specifically on the traffic counter program and that sort of thing, the intent is really to set up a baseline understanding of where our traffic counts are. We understand higher use roads, lower use roads, but we don't have a quantitative number on a lot of these things. So that will help supplement a lot of activities we do in the future, right down from this to road construction. The program is going to be all encompassing on a lot of different aspects.
So I really, it, weighs heavy on all of us. I think everything we talk about comes back to taxes up or service down. That's basically what we're talking about all the time. What service level do we want to maintain? How many taxes do we need? How much in taxes do we need to collect in order to maintain that? And we have to find a way where we're not increasing taxes immensely. Costs of everything has changed from one time to the other as well. And to see a $500,000 per year possible saving here, I think that's a very important number to pay attention to as we're discussing this item, because again, imagine if we don't say yes to that, we need to find the tax revenue to cover that. So that's the hard balance for me, is which way to go. Yes, I want your taxes for it, or no, we won't increase for that. So I just remember when we increased taxes to help us cover for the cost of the enhanced weed control in our ditches, it was not well received. They received more service and their taxes did not cover the more service. So, that it's just, with every different circumstance, we're going to have a little bit of a balancing act that will be hard to answer to, but we will try to find the best balance we can. Councillor Phobes.
Because I'm going to get asked this question, how do we determine the monitoring sites for these, please?
Through the chair, they would be determined by the road supervisor to various sites across the county, sorry. I think 20 to 25 sites is a good average number to be able to have a few in every area of the county. Obviously, we can do a couple more. Just problematic areas, I guess, that we know of. Anything that those grader operators and road supervisor deem would be a good site is how we're going to go about it to begin.
Not to say that those sites could change if something else becomes a problem.
Correct.
Mr. Hogan.
Through you, Mr. Chair. One of the couple of things in relation to this is we've outlined in the RFD that what we're really looking to move towards is a more data-driven approach. So we're tying into that asset management component, tying into the condition reports of the roads and determining the sites that way, looking at how this works. One of the other things that I wanted to address in here, and it's kind of come up in the conversation, I know administratively we've used this term in the RFD, but I think it's causing a bit more complexity than maybe we intended. When we talk about the service level, we're talking about looking at a different way of managing the gravel and the roads program, one of which, in some ways, we're already into with the different grading techniques, the carbide blades, how we do that. What we're looking at here is potentially being able to maintain our roads in a condition that they exist today, and using less material, labor, and cost to do it. So the service that we're talking about is not necessarily a service level reduction in the end product, but a service level in terms of we're putting less gravel on in the way we're doing it. So when we're talking about balancing increased taxes and lower services, we're not talking about a deteriorated road product at the end of the day. We're talking about we're not putting as much gravel on it because we think we have other ways of managing that to achieve the same or a better road product at the end of the day. And so I recognize we've used the term in the RFD that came through administration, but I just wanted to make that clarification, is we're not putting this forward as a degradation to the road system or a decrease in service in that way.
Thank you, that's very important. So basically, there will be no decrease in service at all, just a decrease in the effort it takes to provide that service.
That is correct.
Thank you. Councillor Phobes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Do we not already use the data collection with the citywide program that we are on? Is that data not accurate enough for the collection of where things need to go with citywide?
So yeah, through the chair, we do utilize the work order system for complaints. We have a number of different technologies that we utilize, depending on if we want to know how many rotations a certain road has gotten done. That's a different program. Citywide is primarily the asset management portion of it, but we also utilize the work order for complaints. That's where we, I mean, going back to this, when we started considering this as a potential, I'll call it a pilot project, because I would like to run it, or we would like to run it for a number of years to actually get the full results of it. That's why we're putting it in a 4-year policy review here, so that we can come back. Obviously, throughout the year, we'll report back to council, but we can do a full cycle of our roads in the 4 years and determine if there has been an increase in those work orders or service requests based on road condition. Right now, we don't see, and that's again where I really encourage council to ask your ratepayers if there is a concern to relay it directly to administration, so we can track that stuff, so we can put it into our metrics on if we're succeeding or failing on these sort of things. We will have our staff out there doing all the inspections, but it does come down to what the perception of our roads is, which is very valuable. Where perception of our roads is good, bonus for us. If there's underlying negative out there, we want to know about it so we can adapt our programs to that. So that's, again, we see a potential here. A huge cost savings is one thing, but again, efficiency with a resource that you'll see in a couple of months when I bring it back here with the gravel inventory strategy and where we're looking at our existing sources and where we need to go to maintain over the next 20, 50 years of maintaining just the existing service level. We're going to have to start looking at options like this to extend out our operations.
Reeve King.
So I buy into the conversation around service level and no reduction in the quality of roads, but that's a very subjective conversation. And so as a councillor, I drive roads in not just Kneehill County, but in surrounding counties, and there is a noticeable difference from one municipality to the next. And certainly within Kneehill County, I would say we have pretty good quality roads. I'm not unhappy. However, there are situations and locations within this county where there's a fairly high level of dissatisfaction with specific road or specific locations. And yes, I do encourage them to be pushing those things up the line. So like I said, I think I'm willing to risk this, but one thing that you need to understand, and as councillors, I think we very clearly understand, and as administration, I don't think it's lost on you either. But when you talk to particularly our agriculture ratepayers and the ones who live on acreages, they see roads, 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 and roads as the first 5 or 6 priorities for the county and everything else after that. So we are messing with one of the things that's seen as our highest priority as a county administratively and as a council in terms of our responsibility to our ratepayers. So the note of caution that I would put in this whole conversation is to understand that this is a very subjective thing in terms of what road quality is, and how it's seen by me could be very different in terms of how the next person views that. So I have a concern around the assessment and continued monitoring of road condition, in light of the fact that we've recently made a change on the road supervisory side of our organization. And it sounds to me within the policy and in the conversation that we've had that we're leaning heavily on that road supervisory position to do a lot of this assessment and determination of what needs to be done and where. So what I am looking for is some reassurance from administration to say that the road program support supervisor position is going to be adequate to do the work, and that you're comfortable going in this direction and adding the extra work to that specific position with confidence, knowing that it should be okay. I'm looking for that reassurance.
Thank you, through the chair. 100% we've considered that. We considered the extra, there will be additional requirements on that position here. And going through it, we are very confident that we can meet those requirements.
Great, thank you. Mr. Christie, Councilor Christie.
Just to comment that traffic changes, weather changes, you have to adapt. In everything that I do on my farm, data's king. Like the information that I put together is king to where I send equipment and do stuff. It's gonna get more important for you too, and the weather's gonna change. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the trucks that I'm using. 5 years ago, I had no triaxles, now I have 4. They're not good for roads. And when you look around in our agricultural community, there's way more tridems sitting around than there was 10 years ago. They're not near as kind to the roads if they're driven aggressively. Weather can change from season to season, so the best laid policy this year is no good next year. So the data that you keep with your supervisors back to your operators is gonna be critical for me. And I'm game to try because data's made me a lot of money.
Great, thank you for that. Councilor Cunningham.
Just because I do get the odd question about our dirt roads. So I see you've combined it with this policy. They're bladed a minimum of twice a year. What's the determination whether a dirt road gets any gravel? Because I get a comment, it doesn't ever, okay. The comment that comes to me is there any possibility that we could use our less quality gravel on some of our dirt roads?
Can I comment on that?
Certainly.
I'd love to weigh in on that one. I'd way rather it be on a dirt trail than an actual gravel road. However, the minute you put gravel on a dirt trail, they think it's a gravel road. And that's the risk of putting gravel into a dirt trail, is immediately the expectation of the quality of that road is increased, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Mr. Zier?
I just want to clarify a little bit on there. So in the past, we have put some of our lower quality gravel, depending on which dirt trail, if it's a through road, if there's a justification to it, it has been done in the past. We are straying very far away from that as far as we can here, but just to know that there are some dirt trails out there that have that, you'll see them with gravel on there. We understand.
I get the question about why aren't they re-gravelled then?
Well, fair enough, right? And that's, yeah, and that's exactly what it is that we get into these, we identify these as unmaintained seasonal roads for field access, grain bin access, whatever they need to be. And you, Councillor Cunningham, you're correct that we are getting more and more comments on them not being adequate, even for field access. So we are looking at a bigger program on larger dirt work projects to enhance those bigger brushing projects to actually allow access into that. Because we understand those are really beneficial infrastructure pieces to us, because not only does it allow the access there, it pushes the heavy traffic off our gravel roads. So wherever we can eliminate bigger equipment on our gravel roads, we want to maintain that and allow it as accessible as possible. So that's something that we're working in the new year, maybe putting a couple projects together to start picking away at these roads that have been, I'd say, not as much attention as they should have in the past.
Thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
Okay, thank you for that. I just want to say, I heard you say, Mr. Zier, earlier, the perception of our roads, and I think if I'm understanding you correctly, there is an element to complaint-driven on our roads. So again, I think I would just encourage people to call in when they are unhappy with the quality, or if they have concerns or questions, just make sure they call in. Is that what I'm hearing?
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you.
Zare.
Yeah, through there, 100%. Like I say, not to say that we, to have that conversation with the ratepayer about the condition of the road, not to say that we're going to drop everything we're doing. We have a level of efficiency we try and maintain on all of our operations. So even looking at the greater rotation, if we look at it as a safety aspect, we immediately respond. But if it's something that, I mean, we're servicing all 5,000 ratepayers out there. So if we lift the blade on a maintenance request to go do another one, then we're leaving that stretch of ratepayers as well behind. So we're trying to balance that. But again, coming down to what the metrics we have are our staff site inspections and feedback from the residents. Those are what we base a lot of our operations on.
So back to what you're saying, we are trying to form better and better data. The more and more data that our residents phone into us, the better our plans will be. And so that will help all parties greatly. Okay, I think we have discussed this quite fully at length. Is there anyone else who'd like to have one more question before we move on to looking for a motion? Great, well then, I'm ready for a motion if anyone else has one available. Councillor Woodstock.
I would move that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to approve the recommended changes to policy 13-2, grader and gravel services, and further direct administration to develop an appropriate communications package informing ratepayers of the revisions to the policy.
Thank you for that. Any questions to the motion or comments? Seeing none, I am going to call the vote for our motion that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to approve the recommended changes to policy 13-2. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. I again will call a break. I'll see you back. Oh, 1 moment, sorry.
Do you still need the repeal of 13-6?
Oh, very good, thanks, good catch.
13-36, I mean.
Thank you. Mr. Hogan.
Through the chair, administratively, I don't think we need that motion. That'll come back as part of, when you review this policy at council, that'll be part of the package.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you for that clarity. Thank you, Reeve. Any further questions before I call a break? Okay, we'll have a break for 10 minutes. See you at 11. I'll call our meeting back to order. And we will look at our agenda down to 2.4, the Bill 20. And I believe that's you, Ms. Vanderkool, correct?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I bring you today something other than gravel and roads. It's an overview of the Bill 20 changes. So Bill 20, the Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act 2024, received royal assent on May 30th, 2024, and modifies two key pieces of legislation for Alberta municipalities: the Municipal Government Act and the Local Authorities Election Act. The legislation is intended to help municipalities accelerate housing development, strengthen provincial oversight, and update the rules for local elections and locally elected officials. So I have created a PowerPoint to review some of the major changes. So like I stated earlier, the legislation received royal assent on May 30th, 2024, and most provisions will take effect, did take effect, must have built this RFD before the October 31st, did take effect on October 31st, 2024, as proclaimed on this date, and provisions pertaining to the assessment and property will come into force on January 1st, 2025. So first we'll deal with the councillor accountability changes. So I just kind of nostalgic and put a old council picture from 1963 in there. I just love how all the ashtrays and cigarettes are on the table. So the first change is councillor disqualification. So before Bill 20, a disqualified councillor must resign their seat before it's considered vacant. And the new change is that council can declare a seat vacant in certain disqualifying circumstances. There's about over 10 disqualifying conditions that are listed in the MGA, but these expedited disqualifications are what are pertinent to this change. So failure to file a campaign finance disclosure, becomes a judge, senator, MP, or MLA, absent for 8-week period of regular council meetings, convicted of a criminal offense, becomes a municipal employee. And so all other criteria will use the original process that we used previously. So the process is that councillor, for these expedited disqualifications, is that the councillor is disqualified under Section 174(1) and refuses to resign, that council can declare that person to be disqualified and the seat to be vacant. And the disqualified councillor has 30 days from council declaration to apply to the Court of King's Bench to appeal that declaration.
Ms. Van Kuel, I'd like to interrupt you just for a minute.
Sure.
I think a clarification just for people who are not used to how this rule works. Absent from an 8-week period of regular council meetings, that would be without council approval. So that doesn't mean, should a councillor need it and approach council, council could grant them that time, just so there's a clarity there for our residents.
That's correct. So going on to the next major change is the mandatory councillor training. So before Bill 20, municipalities must offer training. Councillors not required to attend. The changes is that making orientation mandatory. Training must be offered and councillors must attend. So making orientation mandatory will help equip all councillors with foundational knowledge and their role and responsibilities. And then new MGA, it lists what needs to be covered. And these are the items that need to be offered. The MGA breaks down the training for on or before organizational meetings and prior to or on the same day as the first regularly scheduled council meeting. The MGA does not state how these are to be offered, however. So there's discussion on how we can meet these requirements without having having everyone come in. We could maybe have like a a module, and then you sign out the module and sign that you've taken it before the organizational meeting, because the time frame in between election day and the organizational meeting is less than a week. So there's ways that we can try to fit this all in. I don't know. Mike Hogan, do you have anything else to say about that?
Through the chair or the presenter, I guess. Well, yeah, this is one of those things that is, as the legislation changes, we're going to have to slightly adapt how we do that. We'll meet the requirement. It's just a matter of figuring out how. If we're able to arrange an orientation during that time, great. If not, then we'll have to take an interim measure to check these boxes with it to follow, because the time frame between, it's not even just the time frame between the election and when the thing occurs. There's, it probably won't impact us, but there's also a time frame to actually, if you need to do recounts or if you need to do, to confirm election results. So a short time frame is even a little bit shorter. Now, that hasn't generally been an issue here at Kneehill, so we're probably not dealing with that as much. But there is a, we're looking at how we're going to do that, and one way or another we'll meet that, whether that's an interim measure or whether we're actually able to book the orientation there. Our intent right now, and it sounds like from a number of municipalities are going this direction, when we put together our nomination packages and stuff like that, there'll be information in there with some of these dates already predetermined, so that anybody looking at running for council knows that on certain dates, certain things are going to occur. Which is much, we've done that in past years as well, so.
Thank you. So the next major change is removing a counselor. So before Bill 20, a counselor could only be removed following an inspection and failure to comply with ministerial directives. The new change, the new MGA gives the lieutenant governor some options on how to proceed with removal. The MGA lists that to remove a counselor, so the lieutenant governor can either decide to remove the counselor entirely and declare the position vacant, or to direct the CAO to conduct a vote of electors and list the process of, and then the MGA lists how the process, how to conduct that vote is done and what to do if the electors vote for the dismissal. I'm not really entirely sure why they needed this, as they put in the Recall Act of 2022, recalling provides electors powers to remove a counselor, but I wasn't sitting in the room. The next major change is conflict of interest. So before Bill 20, only financial pecuniary conflicts of interest recognized in legislation. The new MGA under Section 170 has done a total complete change. Now councillors have the option to abstain from voting, not only for financial conflicts of interest, but also for perceived or real private interest conflicts. So pecuniary interest, which wasn't changed, so a councillor must recuse themselves from discussions or votes that could monetarily affect them, their family, or business. And now the new conflict of interest part, councillors may recuse themselves from discussion or votes that could benefit them, their family, or business. Councillor must disclose private interest to abstain. So Section 170 provides the process for this. So first of all, councillors should inform the council of their potential conflict and general nature. So for an example, could be, I own a property near the site being discussed for rezoning. I'm going to abstain from discussion and vote to ensure transparency and impartiality. And after that, the recording secretary needs to write down in the minutes what action was, the reason for disclosure and any actions taken. And then also under this new rule, councillor's decision to abstain cannot be challenged. No other councillor or third party can question or overturn their decision. Any questions on that? All right, so we'll go on to,
One question. So that is the voluntary recusal from participating. What happens if you don't voluntarily recuse yourself, continue on with the discussion, and then are found out to be in conflict?
Well, that's when our code of conduct.
Okay, code of conduct cuts in.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Councilor Christie, I'm so sorry.
He doesn't know who I am this morning. I was in camo this morning, but
Please don't take it personally, it's just me.
my question would be, I'm chair of the Trochu Hall. Doesn't affect me financially, but it affects how I manage that hall. If it comes to here, then what do I do?
That would be, yeah, that would be your decision to make.
Mr. Hogan?
So if I'll put this forward and Ms. Vanderkoe can build on this if she wishes, but the changes that they've made in the existing I say existing, the way it has been in the past is that pecuniary interest was the only reason to recuse yourself from a vote, which is almost completely true. The other one, of course, is if you missed a public hearing, you can't vote on that bylaw. But basically, pecuniary interest is the only reason for conflict of interest purposes that you can do that. Otherwise, legislatively, you have to vote. So what they did in this in the new act that has come out is they've recognized that there are other instances in which a conflict or perceived conflict may exist. And they wanted to give some ability for members of council to say, look, I have a sort of conflict here. It might not be purely pecuniary, but it's a conflict, and I probably shouldn't be part of this discussion. What they tried to balance, and we'll see going forward if they've achieved this or not, and I genuinely don't know, is not making it so wide open that councillors could duck votes that they should be voting on. So there is a requirement, you've got to state the reason, you've got to do this, but ultimately it is up to you. But their in general intent is that in those instances where you recognize that there might be other conflicts that are not pecuniary, so say that let's take the scholarship as an example. You guys get those applications anonymously, but oftentimes you probably have a good idea of who, just by virtue of their background and what school they're at, what sport team they're playing on, etc. So you're looking at one of those and you say, oh geez, that's my nephew, right? Under the legislation, that's not technically a pecuniary interest, but it's a perceived conflict, right? So there are instances that they recognize saying, hey, maybe we need a bit broader ability to do this, but we don't want to expand it so wide that it gets abused. And so we'll see how that balance is going forward.
Another downside to this is quorum. So if
Yes.
we had a couple people missing and then all of a sudden somebody had and then we don't have quorum, so it's yeah, we'll wait to see how this turns out.
Reeve, did you have something?
I think my comment was mostly covered by what Mr. Hogan said, but I think in the situation that Councillor Christie brought up, if council as a whole felt there really is not a conflict, then by having to disclose your interest, we could say, no, we're comfortable with you participating in the conversation, and we wouldn't necessarily get ourselves in a jam as far as quorum or some other potential problem because of what might be perceived as a possible conflict. The councillor still has the right to say, no, I still think I want to abstain for the conversation, but at least it gives council an opportunity to say, yeah, we assessed your rationale. We don't feel that the conflict's big enough that you have to recuse yourself. You still could choose to, but we could then give you permission to participate in the conversation.
Thank you. We're ready for you to continue.
Thank you. So the next major change is recall petitions. Mike Hogan's very excited about this one. So before Bill 20, CAO responsible for revalidating recall petitions, which put CAOs in a very difficult position. So the new change is that the minister will validate all recall petitions. The next major change is cabinet interventions in bylaws. So before Bill 20, cabinet can intervene in land use bylaws or statutory plans. The new change is that cabinet may repeal, amend bylaws that exceed municipal authority, are contrary to provincial policy, or contravene the Constitution. I believe this was brought forward because of the City of Edmonton's mask bylaw. I have concerns with this as the MGA does not give reference to the process of how this actually would go. Is there a chance for us to appeal this before they take it away? Did they have a problem with one part of the bylaw? Is the whole bylaw quashed? So there's no really in the MGA how this is going to go forward. And then how do they let the municipalities fix this? So next is going on to housing changes. So planning and development hearings. So before Bill 20, there was no requirement for electronic options for planning and development public hearings, and extra hearings were allowed. The new changes are that planning and development public hearings must include electronic participation options and no extra hearings allowed. I'm not sure why they needed this new provision about the no hearings allowed, because municipalities are usually in the best position to assess when further input or new hearings are required. Then,
Are they going to address internet conductivity then? I think I heard the answer.
yeah, I feel really bad for the small municipalities that need to do this, so. The next one is nonprofit affordable housing taxes. So before Bill 20, nonprofit affordable housing not exempt from property taxes, and now the new change, nonprofit affordable housing is automatically exempt from paying property taxes, and municipalities may remove exemption through bylaw. And I believe that we do not currently have any of these in our municipality, but however, if a nonprofit wanted to build a low housing apartment building, then they would be automatically exempt from paying any taxes. The next one, the residential property tax incentives. So before Bill 20, we're able to offer multi-year property tax exemptions for non-residential properties. Now the new change, you can grant multi-year property exemptions on non-residential, residential and residential properties. Municipalities must set parameters by law. And again, I don't think we have any of these presently. The next one is the regulation making authority. So before Bill 20, no provisions were in place. Oh, and then now joint use planning agreements, the minister may make regulations regarding criteria and exemptions and non-statutory studies. So minister may make regulations limiting non-statutory studies for building and development permits. Now we go into my favorite part, election rules. So, sure.
So I wanted to get in there. So the regulation making authority, those non-statutory studies, like most of this, it remains to be seen how this plays out. There can be some concerns in that though, because what really that they're looking at is those non-statutory studies. If, say, a municipality through its planning and development process was asking a developer to produce certain studies, the minister can make regulations saying, no, actually, you don't need those. And so how that, and I mean, I'm taking something and simplifying it to a large degree, but there is a level of concern there. And again, it's one of those ones we actually don't know how that's going to play out today. But the aim is, if you're looking at the regulations in terms of fostering building and construction, I'm sure we're all aware of the public discourse that's out there. That's potentially one of the ways that can be used. So again, it remains to be seen how that actually plays out. But if there were contentious developments that a municipality was trying to, I don't want to say hold up, but was trying to ask for more information on, that the province wanted to see go forward, there is potential that could be used too.
Thank you. So, candidate eligibility. So they've now included that employees of the Office of the Ombudsman are ineligible unless they take a leave of absence without pay. And under the ineligibility section 22(1.4), a person is not eligible to be nominated if, on or after the time the person gives written notice or is required to give written notice under section 147.22, the person uses or expends anonymous or unauthorized contributions in contravention of section 147, which means that if you have not declared yourself a candidate in the next municipal election and you've collected money for your candidacy. So, in disqualification of a candidate is disqualified and eligible to continue as a candidate if, on or after the candidate's nomination has been accepted, a candidate is convicted of an offense punishable by imprisonment of 5 or more years under sections 123, 124, or 125 of the Criminal Code of Canada. This is now also linked to the, and coincides with the councillor disqualification. Definition of a candidate: an individual who intends to be nominated to run for election in a local jurisdiction as a councillor or as a school board trustee that has given written notice in accordance with section 147.22. So the criminal records check. So prior to this, there was no regulation to have a criminal records check. So municipalities may require a criminal check for candidates. I am bringing an election bylaw to the next council meeting. And so some of the processes in an election, you need to, some of the processes need to be approved before the December 31st prior to election. And this is one of them. And so I'll be bringing this more, to discuss this more in detail at the next council meeting. But I have spoken to the Three Hills RCMP regarding this, and with criminal records check, if you get a named criminal record check, they'll either come back if you don't have a record. It will say, says no record. But if you do have a criminal record, it will come back as a possible match. So we don't know what kind of criminal charge you have had, so I don't know if you really want to ask for these. A lot of municipalities aren't putting this in their bylaw, and there's a huge FOIP issue with this because it's not supposed to disclose this out to the public, but it is a public record. And then also when you do all your paperwork to become a candidate, you sign off affirming that you are eligible to be you're eligible for nomination, and you're affirming that you are not convicted of any offense. So I don't know why you would need that extra document. So I'll just leave that there, and we'll go on to the next one, unless you guys have a question about criminal records checks.
Looks good. Thank you.
All right, so campaign finance and third-party advertising. I'm not really gonna go over this too much because we generally don't get any third-party advertising or huge campaign finances, so you can just read that as you go along. Election finances and contribution disclosure. So a notice required regarding contributions and expenses. No individual and no person acting for the individual shall accept contributions or incur a campaign expense unless the individual has given written notice. And an individual who tends to be nominated or has been nominated to run for election in a local jurisdiction as a candidate must give written notice to the local jurisdiction in which the individual intends to be or has been nominated. So again, if you're going to run, you have to announce that you're going to be running for the election for you to get contributions to your campaign. Register of candidates. A local jurisdiction must maintain a register of candidates that have given notice to a local jurisdiction, and this registration must be publicly available on our municipal website until December 31st after the election. Election finances and contribution disclosure continued. So the definition of for the campaign period, in case of the general election, the period beginning January 1st of the year immediately following a general election and ending December 31st immediately following the general election. So that just makes a campaign period in 4 years. I think the reason why they changed this is because now you are eligible to collect funds for your campaign in all 4 years now. So yeah, so contribution disclosure statements, new yearly disclosure rules in the case of a general election. So, or before March 1st of each year, a candidate who received contributions in the previous year shall file with the secretary of the candidate's local jurisdiction a disclosure statement in the prescribed form. So if you collect any contributions, you have to report it by March 1st of the next year to your municipality. And then a new thing is the late filing. So candidates who file late are obligated to pay a $500 late filing fee. And failure to file a disclosure statement will result in the CAO filing a report with council, which also is made public. So, but not if the disclosure is made no later than 10 days after the deadline. So I guess to do some public embarrassment that you have not put in your disclosure statement. So local political parties and slates regulation, this is only applies to Edmonton and Calgary, so it doesn't apply to us, but they, this now allows registered political parties and slates to be listed on the ballot. Yeah. Permanent electors register. So before this amendment, when electors came to vote, we didn't have an electors list. They just filled out their Form 8, stated that they were eligible to vote. They're a resident of the municipality, and showed us their driver's license, and we gave them a ballot to vote. So now, with the new MGA, municipal's authority to develop a voters list based on enumeration is repealed, and municipalities need to use the most current provincial register of electors from Elections Alberta. So all municipalities in Alberta are now required to enter into agreement with Elections Alberta to receive information from Elections Alberta that will assist the municipality in the creation and revision of the permanent electors register. And we need then to provide information back to Elections Alberta with any changes or more information we received in our election. So we are in discussion with having a page on our website that provides a brief overview of the permanent elector register change. We like to explain how the existing electors list from Alberta elections will be shared with us. And to get on the list, you need to register with Alberta Elections. And and we'll also share the link of how to do that. Special ballots. So prior to this new change, to get a special ballot, you had to have a physical disability, be absent from the jurisdiction during the vote, being a returning officer. But now they've made it where all electors whose name is on the permanent electors register and who are unable to vote at an advance vote or an election day may apply for a special ballot. And we'll develop a process for this and bring back to a future council meeting. Proof of elector eligibility. So the voter identification rules have been amended. Every person who attends a voting station for the purpose of voting must be allowed to vote if the person is named on the permanent electors register and produces one piece of identification, usually with your picture on it. Vouching. So before, vouching was permitted for individuals' age, residence, and identity. Now vouching, a person may only validate the address of the residence if they are accompanied by an elector who knows the person who lives in the jurisdiction. Scrutineers may perform their duties at more than one voting station. That doesn't really apply to us because we usually only have one voting station per ward. So, but the ability for scrutineers, candidates, or their agents to object to an elector has now been repealed. So before they could fill in a form saying that they don't believe that that person is eligible to vote, but the person was still able to vote, but they just would have that form, fill in that form, but now they're not allowed to do that. Ministerial emergency powers, so the minister now may extend or adjourn voting in cases of emergency, disaster, or unforeseen circumstances. And I think this came into effect, was it the last provincial election where a couple of municipalities were displaced due to forest fires, and they had no mechanism to change that date, so now they do. Alternative voting equipment. This doesn't really pertain to us because we do all of our voting manually with ballots, but I really feel sorry for the cities of Edmonton and Calgary who will now have to count over 1 million ballots. So we will not know who was elected in those municipalities for a couple days because it will take them a while to count those. Yeah. So next one is election results. So before this new change, it was ultimately the returning officer's choice if there was going to be a recount or not. But now with new is that if the margin is within 0.5% of the total votes, a candidate can request a recount. And the returning officer will have to oblige them and do a recount. Returning officer appointments, so candidates and their spouses, adult, interdependent partners, children, parents, siblings cannot be appointed as returning officer or a substitute. Before this, it was silent. It didn't really have this in there, and so there was a lot of questioning. Yes. And that's all I have. And then in the package too, there was just a brief of all the changes that I just mentioned.
Well, thank you. Very informative. Some good changes, some interesting changes, and many other comments along the way, probably. Any questions for our presenter? Councillor Woodstock.
So is there such a thing as a most current provincial register?
I have no comment.
But that's one of the regulations that they've just put in. So this is strictly for municipalities. This has nothing to do with the provincial side.
Yeah, we're using the provincial electoral.
Oh, so these are the same rules that they use? Mm-hmm. Really?
So
I'm still trying to figure out if there's a register for, I mean, how do you determine if a person comes to a voting booth and says, yeah, I'm registered to vote here? And how do you prove that they are or they're not?
I'm hoping they're gonna have a form for that.
Okay?
We still don't know. We have another, webinar in December, so hopefully they'll provide us a little bit more information. Right now they're requesting, all of our properties be submitted to them by March 1st. So then they're gonna cross-reference what their list is to all of our properties. And then they'll provide us by, I think it was May 1st, an updated electoral registry. And then there's a whole thing about FOIP, like, how are we gonna keep this private, this list, because. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of unknowns that I can't really communicate to you.
Makes sense of it, obviously that ain't happening.
Any other questions or comments? Love gray? Yeah. Okay, we'll be looking for a motion to accept as information. If anyone would like to make the motion, please. Counselor Cunningham.
I'll move the committee will receive for information the Bill 20, the Municipal Affairs Statute Amendment Act review presentation.
Thank you for that. So we've got some interesting information to be clarified in future dates. And our motion is to receive that information for Bill 20 as presented. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. So that comes to the end of our agenda, unless I missed something and anyone has, great. Okay, so we need to, we do have a closed session item, so we are looking for a motion to go into closed. Councillor Phobes.
So moved.
And all those in favor? Carried unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so we have returned from closed session. We have our agenda completed, and therefore I will adjourn this meeting today. Excuse me, at 12:19.